All right, so this week we're going to be covering HTML, CSS, and CSS libraries. So just give you a little bit of context. Here's your browser, right? And the content is being hosted on some server out there, and we usually refer to as the browser. We refer to the browser as the client, right? As in the machine or software that is asking for a service, right? So it's asking that someone else fulfill some kind of service, right? And so the software that that fulfills that request is referred to as the server, right? The client sends what is called a request, right? And the server responds. Okay, and this is the generic architecture that we refer to as the client-server architecture. Right? In our particular instance, the client and server have agreed to talk in a particular format. We refer to as the HTTP protocol. Right? That's the rules and that the client and the server need to abide. And all those rules are under the umbrella of HTTP. Right? How things are encoded, how things are sent over, and whatnot. Now, typically from the client, you ask for an entry point in using some URL. The URLs have a particular format. They all start with HTTP://. After that, these are all paths. Right? These are presumably directories. Right? That the last element presumably is some physical request, right, of some file that lives under a particular directory. This typically maps to a physical directory on the file system of the server, and this maps to some file, right, typically maybe an index page and whatnot. Okay. This is typical, right, that this maps to a physical file on a file system. But next week, right, we're going to start getting away from that. Right, of trying to think of this not only just as a physical file, but this could be a URL that can be mapped to anything, right? Including dynamic content that the server can generate, without actually being some physical file that lives on a server on a file system, right? The server can decide to respond to anything, to any request, right? But we're not there yet. So the index page, notice that it ends with HTML. That means that the browser, in the response, when it gets the HTML, it's going to interpret it as an HTML document. It's going to look for certain syntax in there. It copies the file locally in its cache, and then it parses it. Right? It reads it into memory. It parses the content, and it creates a data model in the RAM, right? And on the machine that's going to render, right? So the browser parses it, creates a data model. Now this data model, right, is referred to as the DOM, right, or the document object model, right? It's just a it's a big object that lives in the RAM and the memory that the browser has allocated, and it uses it to render. And some of these objects are used to render buttons. Some objects are used to render hyperlinks. Some objects are used to render tables, cells, and columns and whatnot. Yes? Right? What we're going to be doing in much of this semester is that additionally we're going to be downloading JavaScript, right, from the server, and it's going to allow us to dynamically manipulate the DOM, right, by adding nodes to the DOM, removing DOMs or objects, or manipulating the attributes of these objects. And as we dynamically manipulate this in memory, the view changes, right? This renders differently, okay? And that's what we're going to refer to as rendering on the client side, right? On the client, we're on the client, right? And the code is going to be running here on the client, manipulating this DOM, based on some logic. Make sense? Right? We're not there yet. We'll do that next week. This week, we're going to be looking at a static DOM. Right? There's not going to be any JavaScript manipulating this. We parse it. It's a physical file. It's being interpreted by the client, and it's being rendered. Now, the HTML that we use to generate this, right, it's just plain ASCII. So in here, it's just an ASCII file. It's a plain old ASCII file that has lots and lots of pointy brackets, right, with some labels in here, right, some names in here, right, and we're going to refer to these as all these pointy brackets. We're going to refer to these as the tags, right, or the HTML elements, right, that describe these DOM. This is the way the browser interprets those elements, right, once it parses it. And then once it parses it, it doesn't really need the ASCII file, right? It's been run into memory. But we as humans, this is what we're going to be generating, right? This ASCII file using these elements, right? All documents start with an opening tag referred to as the HTML, right? And all elements we refer to as elements or tags. So this is the HTML element. Right, and it has an opening tag and it has a closing tag, right? And inside, between these two, you can have nested elements, right? So you might have here head and head, right? And you might have here another body, and body, right? So all HTML documents are made up of two sub-elements, the head element and the body element. The body element is what the user sees, right? What it renders on the page, right? So anything that is contained inside of the body, you might have buttons and hyperlinks and text and all sorts of, and tables go here. This is what gets rendered and the user sees. In the head, you get all metadata, right? Information about this, right? Other dependencies, things that this document, other things that you might need that are needed to perhaps render this in a different way. So here you might have references to CSS files, JavaScript files, other dependencies would live here. Okay, so metadata lives here. So this week we're going to spend time going over the syntax of these elements and also how to style and make things look pretty using classes and whatnot and the CSS libraries such as Bootstrap. Okay, let's see. Now this HTML document usually in here, right, will refer to other resources, right? So for instance, it might say, I need in here. You might have references to other resources such as other CSS libraries, right? So what will happen is that the browser, as it parses and sees that, ooh, you're referring to an image, right? Or you're referring to a video, or you're referring to a JavaScript file, or you're referring to a CSS file. What the browser will do is that as it parses that, it will generate additional requests. One for each dependency that you're referring to. Okay, any other CSS files, images, videos, right? It will start downloading them. Not only those resources not necessarily need to live on your own server. They could certainly be references to other things that live on the cloud, right? You might have references here to some HTTP, Google, something or other, right? To go fetch this CSS file or this JavaScript from Google. So the browser is completely fine with generating many requests, right? Even parallel requests, to go fetch from anywhere, right? From your own server, but back from where it was downloaded originally, or go out to anywhere out in the internet and retrieve this content. Make sense? All right. Now these HTML elements have a particular syntax. So for instance, the elements have a name, right? So for instance, you might have UL, right? That's the name of the element, and it has an accompanying matching closing tag, right? Where you can, meaning that it has we refer to as the space between the opening and closing. We call that the body of the element. Right? So this is the body of the element, at which you can have some other nested elements such as li. Okay. All right. So these are referred to as the names of the elements. Okay. Elements can also have attributes that allow you to specify more information about that one element. Okay? For instance, you can have attribute line list. Okay, this is an attribute, right, that allows you to configure behaviors for that element. Okay, so for instance, we are configuring the class attribute for that element. Right? An attribute have names and values, right? So it's the name of the attribute, an equal, and then the value of that attribute, typically in quotations. Right? And the standard is to use double quotes. Right? But you can use also single quotes. Oftentimes, you might need to put here content that also has quotes, right? And that is okay. You can have quotes within quotes as long as you alternate, right? So you might have here, quotation here that might say, title, another equals inside of the quotations, and then say new, right? And then close the quotes, right? Notice that this is perfectly fine. You could, if you prefer to, you can use either the single quotation or double quotations as long as you're consistent, right? You can have the single quotation on that side or the inner quotations inside, right? As long as you're consistent. Let's see. All right, I think we saw what we need about the very, very basics of HTML. Okay. Right, so let me stop this.